So over the next couple days, I am going to give you my Premier League predictions. Doing this, going through who I think will be the Premier League winners, top four, Europe, mid-table, in danger, and relegated. Now, today we're going to take a look at the bottom 10, and then tomorrow we're going to take a look at the top 10. And in doing so, I'm going to give my reasonings, go through the teams, go through the squads, where I think these teams are weak and what their problems might be. So let's kick things off then, and we are going to start at the very bottom. And if you've watched one of the videos on my channel recently, you'll probably know where this is going, because for the first team, the team I think is going to finish 20th position, it's going to be Hull City. Now, the way that we're going to do this is we're just going to take a look at the squad and the team itself. So this is how the Premier League website at least thinks that they might line up, at least for the start of the season. Now, it must be said that when you look at this team of Hull, you know, they weren't great, obviously, even in the Championship. You might say they were a bit fortunate to come up. They have made some signings. They apparently are going to make even more signings. But, of course, that is then going to take them some time. Is this team good enough to stay up? No. Right? Are the players that they potentially bring in, could they be good enough to stay up? Maybe, but I still think it's a pretty big ask. And they are starting, of course, further on. They should struggle, especially at the early part of the season. Okay, now let's talk about who I'm going to put in 19th, and it's actually not going to be one of the newly promoted sides. This is a team I think some people do have some worries for sure, and that is Fulham Football Club. So why do I worry for Fulham? Well, I think that this is a very difficult Premier League season to predict just because there's so many new managers, there's so much turnover. I think it's very likely that of, the many new managers we see, one or two of them will probably catastrophically fail. And I think the best bet for that is probably a manager who isn't very experienced as a manager, hasn't ever managed in the Premier League before, and is taking over a team that I think, whilst it does have some good players, don't get me wrong, like if this is their strongest team, I think Anthony Robertson is a very good player. Obviously, Garcia, there's a lot of pressure on him, and I think he will probably determine whether Fulham stay up or not. And with some of the departures from the squad as well, I mean, some of the players have gone to Ipswich, two of them, I think they're lacking a bit of depth as well in this team. Could Muniz come in up front if Garcia is struggling? Yeah, but does that fill me with a ton of confidence? Not really. They've got Kevin and Oscar Bob, who are fine. I also think they probably want to play a fairly high pressing style. Do I think that this would really suit this team? Again, that's a very different style to, the pragmatic style that, or certainly more pragmatic style that Fulham had kind of gone for before. Personally, I think that Leno is not a very good goalkeeper. I don't think he's a Premier League goalkeeper. I'm basically betting on the fact that Arbeloa and his inexperience might cause them some issues as well. Okay, next up, let's take a look at 18, and the final relegation spot I am going to give to Coventry City. Now, when we're talking about Coventry and looking at this team, obviously they did win the championship, although there has, I think, been a bit of a history of the team that actually wins the championship does then sometimes struggle a bit more than some of the others. Really, what I'm looking for a team who gets promoted is you kind of have to have one of two things. You have to be able to find who is going to score the goals, right? And Haji Wright, I mean, right now is injured, but, can he score the goals? Maybe. Sims, they've just brought in Awani. Maybe they can provide some goal threat, but I'm not, again, when I'm thinking of like Leeds last year and I'm thinking of Calvert-Lewin scoring, 14, 15 goals, whatever it was, do they have that player in their squad, in their team? I'm not too sure. And if you don't have that, if you're going to go more of the Sunderland kind of way, then I think you need an incredible home support and kind of making it a real fortress, which I'm not sure if Coventry will be able to do. And you need an extremely solid defense, which, again, maybe they can do, but even in the championship, that wasn't necessarily their forte. Okay, so then let's talk about the other teams I think are in danger, and I'm going to keep it simple here. I am going to go Ipswich next. Okay, so when we're looking at Ipswich's team, obviously they have spent quite significantly bringing in some Premier League experience like Diop and Lukic. Maeda has obviously scored a lot of goals for Celtic. Will that translate? Probably not nearly as much, but we'll have to see, of course. To me, a big question is Emerson. Again, I think to stay up, you have to find a way of scoring those goals, and I think a big part of this will be, can he adapt to the Premier League? How does he do? But I do quite like a few of their signings, and I do think they have a decent chance, and they've given this a pretty good go. And you have to remember, this was kind of always Ipswich's kind of philosophy in a sense. Last time they came up, it was almost like, well, we'll take the money, we'll go back down, we'll come back up, and then have a better squad to really challenge the next time. And now they are in that cycle. And obviously with their manager as well, in Gary O'Neill, Obviously, it was a disaster at Wolves at the end, don't get me wrong, but he has done it before, right? He has been in this position before and kept teams up. Okay, so that the way, who else is going to struggle? Well, my next team that I think is going to struggle a little bit is Sunderland. And the reason I'm going to put Sunderland down there is not necessarily because of what you're looking at right now, which I still think is actually a fairly decent side overall, particularly that defensive line, although there are some injuries right now, but they shouldn't be too long-term, and Mukiele and Alderete, I still think they will be solid, but it's just the fact that they're also playing in Europe. They don't have, again, the deepest of squads across the board. I think, they are a couple key injuries away from being in some trouble, and obviously playing, 2 games a week, for most of the season, hopefully for them, if they're going to do all right in Europe, I think just could cause them some issues. They did overperform some of their data last year as well. They struggled to score goals. And so I think just the combined element of all of that might lead them to, having a bit of a downturn in performance overall. Okay, next up, I'm going to go for a side that I'm not feeling too great about right now, and that is Everton. So the reason I'm a little bit down on Everton is, again, just the goal scoring. To me, Everton just have clear, gigantic holes in their team, right? Fullback is a gigantic problem for this team. A gigantic problem for this team. And then going forward as well, I mean, there was rumors about Njai leaving. Maybe that won't happen now, but even so, with Njai, obviously every Everton fan knows the Barry Beto problem. Are those attacking options really there? I can see that they maybe have a solid core, between Pickford, Tarkowski, Branthwaite, Garner, and Norgard maybe in there these days. Like, I can see how, they can create a solid core of a team and not necessarily struggle in terms of like being relegated or anything. But I do think they've still got pretty gigantic holes, not just in terms of their squad, but actually who is starting on the pitch. Okay, so let's move on from those teams that are struggling and come into the mid-table. So we're talking now about the 14th position. And in 14th, it's a classic. It's the old favourite of this team. Well, 13th or 14th, that's roundabout where they always are. Crystal Palace. Again, for Palace, the problem is, they have lost Gehi. They've lost Lacroix as well now, right? That's 2 big losses. Munoz might go as well. So that's 3 big losses. It's the Europe problem for them. It's a new manager, perhaps, as well for them. I do think this team should be good enough overall. It should be experienced enough, and they've already gone through Europe now as well. Still probably think they need some extra bodies in there, to be honest. We'll see what they do in the last couple of weeks here. They've got enough, right? Between Wharton, Sarr, Mateta, even if it's Strand Larson, Pino, Kamada, they're all good. Richards we know is very good as well. Henderson is a solid keeper. So, I'm not predicting they'll be in danger, but if you're a Palace fan, you've seen this many times. Moving up in the mid-table, I am now going to go for Bournemouth. Now, Bournemouth are one of these teams that I think sneaky under the radar could struggle a little bit more this year, and I'll explain why. I actually think they have a really, really good team. When they're at full strength, there are some questions over the defense. I mean, Petrovic, I don't think is a very good goalkeeper, and he's playing in a terrible kit, as you can see just there. In fact, their normal home kit as well is pretty terrible with this sponsor on it. Some new defensive players coming in as well. We'll see how that works out. But Truffert is, an amazing left back, in my opinion. I think that Scott and Adams, when Adams is fit, that's a very solid midfield. And then Ryan, I think, will obviously be a very good player. And their front lineup looks pretty good. And that's actually with Krupi injured as well. Obviously, Krupi should be coming back maybe halfway through the season. We'll have to see. The problem for this team specifically is Europe under Iraola. And it looks like they're probably going to try somewhat similar things of being, high intensity, high press. And if you do that, you basically just can't do that, right? You can't do that playing, multiple times every week. It's just not going to happen. And we saw Palace, even Palace, who, don't play the most intense style, or certainly didn't under Glasner last year. Even they, with a thin squad, they were struggling with it, right? They had multiple times when they're having to play players, who are coming up from the youth squad. And you look at their squad as well, so there is weaknesses here. And so they're not going to have a bad season because I think their team is too good to have a terrible season, but I do expect a bit of a downturn. Okay, next up, probably a team that you thought I might have already put on this list, but they're only going to make their showing right now, and that is Newcastle United. So this is the Newcastle team, and obviously we know so much about all the players that they have lost, and obviously that's a big part of why people think that they'll struggle. Also a new manager coming in later than most new managers. Hall and Livramento, though, if they do stay, are very good fullbacks, and if they are fit, very good fullbacks, so that's a strength. And I know that in particular, Wissa, didn't do much last year for Newcastle, and obviously was injured for large parts of last year. But we have seen him do pretty well in the Premier League. And we saw him do pretty well at the World Cup as well. He's still obviously pretty good at football and knows how to score in the Premier League. I actually wonder if they could set up in a back three, if it might be better for them, because I think a big question that they have is what to do with Voltemada. Right? Voltemada is a very particular player. Setting up in a 3-4-3, with Livramento and Hall being able to bomb on even more so, you add in Byrne as a centre-back option, of course, that they already have, who, could definitely fill in there, of course. And then you put Voltemada at the front of kind of that 3-4-3, and that allows him to kind of play that Mateta role where he doesn't have to be as active. He can basically just take the ball, hold up the ball, and then use, kind of his skill or even drop in deeper as well to then allow, your Murphys or your Wissers or your Asulas or whoever is, Torres running on behind. I wonder if that is something that maybe they could take a look at doing. I am still having some hope for this team because I do think someone like Wissa, could easily score 15 goals for Newcastle this season and they end up being absolutely fine. And then finally, in 11th position, I'm going to go for maybe a bit of a surprise pick here as well, and that is Aston Villa. So now, Villa fans might feel a little bit harshly done by here because, of course, you've still got Unai Emery. There are still parts of this team which are the same that has obviously done very well last year. Again, though, looking at some of the data from last year, maybe Villa did overperform a tick. Obviously, they're back in the Champions League. So that they're going to obviously want to do well like they did the last time they were in the Champions League. So maybe a slight downturn there. And then also they have lost, some pretty big players for their team, right? I think Tielemans obviously is a pretty significant loss for them. Obviously, Morgan Rogers is a gigantic loss, especially in terms of playing multiple times a week. Ollie Watkins might even leave as well. Konsa might even go to Arsenal, right? So, and Martinez might be on the way out also. So there could be a lot of turnover here, right? This could be a very, very different Villa squad, which might be good for them in the long term. But I do think that short term, just looking at this season, it might take a bit more time to get it right. And then competing in the Champions League as well might be a bit too much for them. So that is part one of the Premier League table prediction. Stay tuned for part two, which will release tomorrow, and find out who I think is going to win the Premier League.